My brothers, my sisters, welcome back to the channel. Today we speak not just of Burkina Faso, but of Africa's awakening. If you believe in freedom, unity, and the power of our people, then make sure you subscribe. Share this story, and let the world hear Africa's voice. Because what you are about to witness is not just history, that is destiny. The rain fell in long, heavy sheets that night, drowning the sounds of the capital and washing away the dust that had clung to Ouagadougou's weary streets. The lamps flickered weakly under the downpour, their yellow light stretching across puddles that mirrored the city's fatigue. Somewhere in the dark, sirens wailed and faded. Soldiers on patrol whispered under their breath. Nobody knew what tomorrow would bring, only that something was coming. Something vast, unexplainable, and irreversible. The air was alive with rumor. They said President Ibrahim Traoré had locked himself in the command building for 3 nights straight. They said he had dismissed his cabinet, that foreign envoys were leaving the city, that the Americans were preparing sanctions. Every whisper added to the tension, until even the rain seemed to hesitate before touching the ground. Above the silent government quarter, lightning revealed the national flag, soaked and clinging to its pole, half visible through the mist. Beneath it, in a dimly lit office, the youngest leader on the continent sat alone before a map of Africa spread across a wooden table. Each borderline shimmered faintly under the lamp's flickering glow, every mark of division drawn by hands that had never felt the heat of this soil. For a long moment, Traoré simply stared at it, his jaw still, his eyes hollow with thought. He could feel the weight of history pressing through the ink. Those lines, each one a scar, each one a story of separation. The world outside believed those borders eternal, but he knew they were only cages made of paper and power. Somewhere deep inside, something in him had begun to resist them, to reject the idea that a continent needed permission to breathe. Beyond the compound walls, the streets of Ouagadougou shimmered beneath the storm. Markets lay empty, doors barred, radios silent. Mothers pressed their children close as the thunder cracked. Traders stood by their stalls, watching the rain swallow their goods. Everyone felt it, a tension that had no name, a silence that seemed to wait for a single voice to break it. Foreign news channels replayed old footage, the image of Thomas Sankara speaking of unity, of a free Africa. Commentators mocked, diplomats speculated, investors panicked. Burkina Faso cannot stand alone, they said. But the truth was simple. Burkina Faso had never been alone. It had simply been ignored. Inside the command building, the storm's light flickered through the windows as Traoré leaned closer to the map. His fingertips brushed across the Sahel, tracing the borders of Niger, Mali, Ghana, Togo, names carved into land like fences. His pulse slowed. For months, an idea had been growing in him, something that no one else would dare to attempt. It had begun on a border patrol months earlier. He had seen a trader stopped by soldiers for lacking the right papers. The man's hands were rough, his clothes torn from travel, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. When they tore up his documents and turned him away, Traoré felt something sharp twist inside him. That night, he stood under a wide sky and whispered to himself, "Why does an African need permission to walk on African soil?" The question stayed with him. It became a wound he couldn't ignore. As the weeks passed, he watched his people suffer. Gold leaving the ground, profits leaving the country, hunger settling where hope should live. The International Monetary Fund demanded more concessions. Foreign partners smiled while tightening invisible chains. Even allies doubted him, calling him naive, reckless, idealistic. But every word of doubt only pushed him deeper into conviction. He began to write in secret, sketches of a system that would free his people not just economically, but spiritually. Pages of notes filled with maps, symbols, equations, plans for trade and movement. On the cover, he scrawled 2 words in red ink, Operation Dawn. Few within his inner circle knew what it meant. Some assumed it was military, others thought it was a reform project. In truth, it was a revolution written in silence. He wanted to open his country's gates, to let every African walk freely across its borders, no visas, no fees, no conditions. To begin the erasure of artificial separation. When he shared this vision with his closest advisors, their faces froze between disbelief and fear. It will break the economy, they warned. It will invite chaos. But Traoré said nothing. He didn't argue. He simply looked at the map again, as if waiting for the land itself to answer him. The rain outside grew heavier. Static buzzed across the city's communication networks as his orders spread in encrypted messages. Power grids were being rerouted, servers disconnected, data traffic masked. Every system was going dark one by one, as though the nation was holding its breath. At midnight, the streets fell silent. No news broadcasts, no speeches, no announcements, just the hiss of rain and the hum of lightning. Foreign embassies scrambled, their phones unanswered. No one could see what was happening inside the country anymore. Inside his office, Traoré opened a notebook filled with letters from citizens, students, farmers, widows. They spoke of hunger, yes, but also of dignity, of wanting to see their brothers and sisters across borders without fear, of feeling trapped in their own continent. He thought of his father, who had fought under another flag before independence. He thought of his mother, who had never left the province she was born in. He thought of Sankara, cut down before his time, yet still echoing in every dream of freedom. The clock on the wall ticked softly, almost mocking in its calm. He rose, crossed to the window, and stared out at the city. The storm was beginning to fade. The sky was the color of steel, the horizon still bleeding from the night. In the distance, the faint outline of the cathedral tower pierced through the mist, standing beside a mosque minaret, two silhouettes reaching upward together. He closed his eyes and saw what could be. Africans moving freely, traders crossing deserts without bribes, families reunited after decades of division. He saw young men and women exploring their continent like explorers of their own destiny, not prisoners of colonial geography. The image filled him with both awe and fear. Freedom always demanded a price. Behind him, the decree lay ready on his desk, sealed with the national crest. It was simple, almost plain, just a few paragraphs that would overturn a century of imposed boundaries. At sunrise, it would be read aloud to the nation. He knew what would follow: outrage, isolation, retaliation. They would call him reckless, destabilizing, dangerous. They might even call him a threat. But in his heart, he had already accepted that some acts of courage can only be understood by time. Outside, a single clap of thunder echoed across the empty city. The last of the rain tapered off, leaving only the smell of wet earth and smoke. Lights flickered back to life in the distant neighborhoods. Dogs barked. Somewhere a baby cried. Life was returning, but it would not be the same life by morning. He turned off the lamp and stepped out into the corridor. The guards at the entrance stood at attention, their boots shining with rainwater. They saluted without a word as he passed, his coat brushing against the wall, his footsteps steady, deliberate. At the far end of the hallway, a wide window looked out over the capital. He paused there for a moment, watching the faint blush of dawn bloom along the horizon. The world was asleep, but the earth beneath it was stirring. He rested his hand against the cold glass. Let them wake to something they've never seen, he thought. A gust of wind carried the sound of drums from somewhere distant. Soft, rhythmic, ancestral. And as the first light broke through the clouds, the young leader's reflection vanished in the brightness. When the sun finally rose over Burkina Faso that morning, it did not rise over a nation waiting for orders. It rose over an idea, a whisper carried by 1,000 hearts ready to become a storm. The people didn't yet know. The ministers didn't yet speak. The world still slept. But history, silent and watchful, had already opened its eyes. What he would announce in the next hour would set a continent ablaze. And nothing, not even the borders drawn in ink and fear, could stop what was coming. The sun rose over Ouagadougou like a curtain lifting on a new era. The rain had washed the city clean, leaving the air sharp and heavy with promise. By dawn, the streets had begun to stir, vendors setting up stalls, children chasing puddles, soldiers returning from night patrols. The world looked unchanged, but in the heart of the capital, something vast and irreversible had already begun. At exactly 6 in the morning, the national broadcast network flickered to life. Static gave way to a single image, the red, green, and gold of the Burkina Faso flag waving under a pale sky. No music, no anthem, no introductions, just the flag, and then the voice of the announcer, steady but trembling. By order of the transitional government, effective immediately, all visa fees and border restrictions for citizens of African nations are hereby abolished. Every African may now enter the territory of Burkina Faso freely. The words hung in the air like thunder that refused to fade. Across the nation, radios crackled. In villages where electricity was rare, people gathered around old receivers, listening in disbelief. In classrooms, teachers stopped mid-sentence. In crowded markets, the chatter fell silent, replaced by the collective heartbeat of a nation that had just defied the world. For a moment, the city was utterly still, and then, slowly, noise returned. Shouts, laughter, confusion, and awe. Women wept openly. Men dropped their baskets and embraced strangers. The old began to pray. The young began to sing. Across the border in Ghana, the news spread like wildfire. Truck drivers parked their vehicles and began honking in celebration. Traders called each other, shouting in disbelief. In Mali, a group of young men waved Burkina Faso flags they had stitched by hand, chanting the name of the country that had dared to do what others only dreamed. But in the tall glass buildings of foreign capitals, the reaction was colder. Diplomatic phones began ringing. Economic analysts scrambled for statements. Reporters asked, "What does this mean for border security, for migration control, for the West African bloc?" Behind closed doors, ambassadors used words like reckless, populist, uncontrolled. In Ouagadougou, however, none of that mattered. The people poured into the streets. Soldiers lowered their rifles, watching as the crowds grew, their chants rising in rhythm with the morning sun. It was no longer about one decree. It was about reclaiming something they had forgotten was theirs: unity. By noon, the first travelers began arriving at the border. A man from Niger, carrying a small bag and a wooden flute. A family from Benin, holding hands and walking barefoot across the line. A group of young traders from Mali, waving cloths and shouting blessings. The border guards stood uncertain for a moment, their eyes darting to the radio message pinned beside the gate. Then one of them stepped aside, smiling faintly. "Welcome," he said. The family wept as they crossed. The man with the flute began to play. The traders lifted their bags and entered laughing. Behind them, the line began to grow. Hundreds, then thousands, moving freely for the first time in generations. Back in the capital, President Traoré stood before his council. The room was heavy with unease. "Do you realize what you've done?" one minister said, his voice rising. "The ECOWAS may retaliate. France will issue statements. The IMF will cut support. Our borders, Traoré interrupted quietly, were never ours to begin with." Silence filled the chamber. The young leader's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of defiance that made every man in the room sit straighter. "We speak of Africa as if it is a collection of cages," he continued. "But a cage is not a country. A cage is a prison made to contain what others fear. I will not rule over a prison." He turned toward the window, where the chants of thousands echoed faintly through the streets below. "If freedom costs us comfort," he said, "then let us pay the price." Outside, the crowds had begun waving not only the Burkina Faso flag, but those of Mali, Niger, Togo, and Ghana. Foreign journalists captured the scenes. Border crossings overflowing, traders setting up shared stalls, musicians playing drums across checkpoints that no longer mattered. But there were shadows too. In the offices of the African Union, unease grew. Some leaders admired Traoré's audacity, others saw only risk. If borders fell, so might control. If Burkina Faso's experiment succeeded, it could ignite a movement too large to contain. By evening, the news had reached every corner of the continent. In Senegal, students painted murals of a united Africa. In South Africa, commentators debated the implications. In Nigeria, Talk shows buzzed with divided opinions, some calling it visionary, others suicidal. Meanwhile, in Paris and Washington, officials exchanged coded cables. The words were cautious, but the meaning was not. We must monitor the situation closely, prevent escalation, consider economic measures. Inside the Burkina Faso intelligence office, encrypted messages flooded the servers. Cyber attacks spiked. Drones began appearing near border regions. The nation had taken a step into the unknown, and not everyone wanted to see it succeed. Night fell again over the capital. The celebrations slowed, but did not stop. The sound of drums rolled through the city, mingling with the hum of generators and the distant roar of motorcycles. On rooftops, families watched the lights of distant towns flicker in the horizon, wondering if this was how revolutions began. Not with war, but with an open gate. In a quiet room inside the command building, Traoré sat alone once more. A high flicker of candlelight played across his face, and in front of him lay a stack of reports. Border influxes, international reactions, possible sanctions. He read each one carefully, but his expression never changed. He reached for a small radio and tuned it to a local frequency. A woman's voice filled the static. She was speaking in Mossi, her tone trembling with emotion. "My brother crossed from Niger today," she said. For the first time, no one stopped him. For the first time, he came home without fear. Traoré closed his eyes. Outside his window, the city glowed faintly beneath the stars. He could hear the hum of thousands who refused to sleep, as though they feared waking up to find it all undone. But there was no turning back now. This was not just policy, it was prophecy. Beyond the border, Africa was beginning to move. Traders, farmers, artists, dreamers, all following invisible paths across the land, testing the promise of a united continent. They came with songs, with hope, with memory, and though the governments debated and the powers prepared their responses in the streets of Burkina Faso, something deeper than politics was unfolding. It was not rebellion, it was rebirth. As the wind swept through the capital that night, carrying chants of unity, a quiet truth settled over the land. This was only the beginning. The storm that had started in one small nation was rolling outward, gathering force. And by the time the world realized what was happening, Africa would already be awake. The morning after the decree, the world's eyes turned toward Burkina Faso. Cameras from foreign media lined the streets of Ouagadougou, their lenses seeking chaos, waiting for proof that the experiment would fail. But instead of panic, they found order. Strange, fragile, but real. Lines of new arrivals waited patiently at border stations that had been transformed overnight into welcome centers. Volunteers served food, children waved flags. The government's message was clear. Africa was welcome home. But beneath the surface of jubilation, tension began to brew. Hidden hands moved in the dark. By the third day, the capital's power grid flickered. For 2 nights in a row, blackouts rolled through the city without warning. When the lights went out, whispers began, rumors of sabotage, of infiltrators among the crowd. Traoré's security chief warned him, "We've intercepted messages from groups near the borders. Someone is trying to turn this unity into a weapon." Traoré listened in silence, his face unreadable. Outside, the unity he had ignited was beginning to strain under its own weight. Thousands poured into the country from Mali, Niger, Benin, Ghana, people seeking work, food, or simply belonging. But food supplies were thin, roads clogged with trucks and carts, hospitals overflowed. Local merchants grew uneasy, fearing shortages. The very freedom that had inspired millions was now threatening to crush the fragile system holding it together. And then came the warning from abroad. The IMF issued a formal notice. All aid and financial support to Burkina Faso were suspended pending economic reassessment. Foreign banks froze transactions. The franc began to drop. Imports stalled. The markets grew quiet. But it wasn't just the economy under siege. Reports came in of men posing as migrants near the northern border, armed, organized, moving with military precision. Intelligence linked them to old mercenary networks, funded by those who saw Traoré's Africa First vision as a threat to their power. Still, he refused to close the borders. "We opened the gates for Africa," he told his council. "We do not shut them because the enemy walks among our brothers. We stand together or we fall together." The ministers exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared oppose him. Not yet. As days passed, chaos and hope danced side by side. Markets swelled with color and noise, traders from all over West Africa exchanging goods under one flag. Yet beyond the cheers, hunger crept closer. Trucks carrying grain were intercepted at night. Convoys mysteriously rerouted. Somewhere, invisible hands were tightening a noose in the heart of the capital. A journalist's footage leaked online. Masked men in foreign uniforms seen near the outskirts, marking coordinates with handheld devices. The clip spread across Africa like wildfire. The message was clear. Someone wanted this dream of unity to burn before it took root. But Traoré was not blind to the threat. He began visiting border villages personally. Dressed in plain fatigues without fanfare, he met farmers, traders, and mothers who had walked days to reach the land of open gates. He saw their exhaustion, their faith, their quiet defiance. One old woman grabbed his hand and whispered, "They will try to starve you. But hunger is nothing new to us. We will eat dust if we must, but we will not go back." That night, standing by a dying campfire on the edge of the Sahel, Traoré looked up at the stars and thought of Sankara, the man whose dreams had once been buried under bullets and fear. And for a moment, the sky seemed to answer him with silence that carried meaning. He knew now that this movement was no longer his alone. Back in Ouagadougou, foreign diplomats requested urgent dialogue. Some called him delusional. Others offered conditional deals, money in exchange for control. But Traoré refused all offers. His message was the same. "We are not negotiating the birth of our freedom." As his resistance hardened, the sabotage grew bolder. One night, explosions ripped through 2 communication towers near the northern frontier. Radio lines went dead. Panic rippled through the capital. Foreign outlets rushed to label it the collapse of the open border dream. But before dawn, new transmitters were erected by local engineers. Improvised, unstable, yet enough to restore contact. Volunteers worked by torchlight, building with what they had. And when the morning broadcast resumed, the national anthem played across the airwaves, carried on static but strong. The people wept again, not from fear, but from recognition. This was their struggle now. Meanwhile, across Africa, the movement began to spread. In Mali and Niger, citizens marched with signs reading, "If Burkina opens, we all open." In Senegal, student leaders quoted Traoré's words in rallies. Hashtags calling for One Africa No Borders trended online. Even within countries still bound to colonial systems, murmurs of reform began to rise. The pressure was growing on every side: economic, political, military. But the spirit of something ancient and unstoppable had been awakened. By the 3rd week, Traoré convened a secret meeting with his closest aides. The room was lit by a single lamp, the air thick with fatigue and conviction. Maps were spread out on the table, marked with symbols and coded notes. "Our adversaries expect a retreat," he said. "They want to see us close the gates, beg for funds, restore their order. But they don't understand. This is no longer about borders. It's about who defines Africa." He paused, his gaze sharp. "They have gold, they have drones, they have power. But we have something older, faith." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a storm gathering over the horizon. The smell of rain mixed with dust, heavy and electric. By midnight, the first drops began to fall, drumming softly on the tin roofs of the capital. As the storm grew, the city went dark again. Another blackout, deliberate and cruel. But this time, instead of fear, songs began to rise from the windows. Families lit candles and sang into the night, their voices defying the silence. It was no longer about one man or one decree. Burkina Faso had become a symbol, a trembling light in the darkness, daring to exist where logic said it shouldn't. And though the storm outside raged louder, Ibrahim Traoré stood at his window, eyes fixed on the lightning-lit horizon. "Unshaken," he whispered almost to himself. "They are testing our resolve. But they will learn. Africa does not break. It bends, it bleeds, but it does not break. Far beyond the capital, unseen figures moved under the rain, some carrying aid, others carrying weapons. The borderlines blurred under mud and thunder, and somewhere, between hope and destruction, a new Africa began to stir. The world waited for the collapse. But what came next would not be collapse. It would be confrontation. The rains came harder that week, washing over the red earth like a cleansing ritual. Streets turned to rivers, and soldiers waded through mud as if through history itself. The capital flickered in and out of light, power dying, hope rekindling, each blackout more symbolic than the last. In the storm's breath, it felt as though something immense and invisible was moving beneath the surface of events, tightening its hold, preparing for revelation. By now, every nation was watching. What had begun as a bold humanitarian gesture had transformed into a continental tremor, and for those who benefited from Africa's divisions, it was becoming intolerable. International headlines changed tone overnight. Words like unity and vision were replaced with instability and risk. Foreign analysts warned that Burkina Faso had opened a door it could not close. Inside the presidential compound, security reports arrived faster than they could be read. Supply routes had been cut. Convoys of medical aid were intercepted. Satellite images showed foreign aircraft circling near border zones. Mercenaries, faceless, stateless, had begun gathering in the north. Still, Traoré refused to call for foreign assistance. He gathered his council under candlelight once again, their faces drawn, their hands restless. The rain beat against the windows, drowning every whisper except his. "They want me to seal the borders," he said quietly, "to prove that I can't control what I've built." But this isn't about control. It's about faith, a general leaned forward. Faith doesn't feed our people. We're running out of grain. If we don't act now, the unity you built will become chaos. Traoré's gaze hardened. Then we will share the chaos, together. Every man, every woman, every stranger who walked through our gates. We suffer as one. That is the meaning of Africa. Not luxury, not stability, brotherhood in the storm. Outside, the lightning flashed again, revealing the outlines of the soldiers standing guard in the rain. They looked exhausted, soaked but resolute. The city might have been drowning, but it refused to kneel. And then, the strike. At dawn, an explosion tore through the northwestern trade depot, igniting fuel reserves that burned for hours. Columns of smoke curled into the gray sky, blackening the clouds. Within hours, foreign networks declared Burkina Faso under attack. The footage of fire and panic looped endlessly, crafting a story of chaos and failure. But those within the country knew better. This was not a collapse, it was sabotage. A message written in flames: turn back or burn. That night, Traoré stood before the charred ruins, surrounded by civilians who refused to go home. He said nothing at first, just watched the embers glow like dying stars. Then, raising his voice above the crackling ruin, he spoke words that would echo far beyond that night. They think this will make us afraid, but a man who has nothing left to lose cannot be threatened. Look around you. We have already lost everything they value. All that remains is what they cannot take, our dignity. The crowd erupted in chants, not of anger, but of defiance. The flames behind them became torches, illuminating faces streaked with ash and tears. The moment was raw, dangerous, transcendent. But unseen by most, darker forces continued their advance. Intelligence confirmed multiple infiltration points, groups posing as traders, carrying arms and foreign equipment. Disinformation flooded social media, painting Traoré as a tyrant hiding behind populism. Within days, the pressure had become unbearable. And then came the ultimatum. A sealed message arrived from a coalition of friendly nations. It was polite, formal, and poisonous. Close your borders within 72 hours. Reinstate visa controls. Normalize relations, or face collective isolation. The council erupted. Ministers shouted, generals warned of collapse, economists pleaded for reason. But Traoré simply stared at the document, then tore it in half without a word. For him, it was no longer political, it was spiritual. He retreated to the old presidential archive that night, a small, dusty chamber lined with relics of past leaders. Among them was a photograph of Thomas Sankara, smiling faintly, his eyes filled with the same fire that now burned behind Traoré's. He whispered, "They killed you for dreaming." But dreams do not die. And then he began drafting something new. Not a speech, not a decree, but a letter to every African head of state. It was simple, handwritten, unguarded. If our unity scares the world, then it is the world that must change, not us. You are not my enemy. You are my brother. Let our borders fall one by one until there is nothing left to divide us. Let them sanction us, isolate us, curse us, but let them never say we were afraid. He signed it, Ibrahim Traoré, son of Africa. Copies were smuggled out overnight. Within a week, they reached leaders across the continent. Some burned them, others read them twice. But among the youth, the soldiers, and the common people, those words spread like wildfire. In universities from Dakar to Nairobi, walls filled with the phrase, "Son of Africa." The movement had transcended politics. It had become prophecy. As the 72-hour deadline passed, the world waited for surrender. None came. Instead, the Burkina Faso flag was raised higher than ever, its colors bright against the rain-heavy sky. And that night, something extraordinary happened. Thousands of candles appeared across the capital, in windows, on streets, on rooftops. Each flame represented a border now defied, a nation now awake. Drone footage captured the city glowing like a constellation of resistance. But not everyone celebrated. Far beyond the borders, in rooms with glass walls and polished tables, a decision was made. The plan was simple. If unity could not be stopped with fear, it would be stopped with force. Troop movements began near the frontier. Supply chains tightened further. Communications went dark again. And in the silence before dawn, as thunder rolled low over the horizon, Ibrahim Traoré stood before his reflection, weary, gaunt, but unbroken. He whispered to the storm, "They're coming." Then, as lightning flared across the sky, he added, "Let them." Because he knew what they didn't. That an idea had already crossed the borders long before any soldier ever could. Africa had begun to awaken, and no army could fight what was already alive. The dawn arrived without birdsong. The sky hung low and gray over Ouagadougou, swollen with the weight of an approaching reckoning. Every street was hushed. Even the markets that once overflowed with song and laughter were still. It felt as though the entire nation was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable. Before sunrise, reports began streaming in. Foreign-backed forces were moving across the northern border, coordinated, well-equipped, precise. Drones circled overhead, unseen but felt in the hum of the clouds. The attack had begun. Traoré stood in the Situation Room surrounded by maps and the faint glow of emergency lights. Communications were jammed. The power grid flickered again and again, but the control center remained intact. Officers moved briskly, issuing commands to regional commanders, mobilizing what remained of the defense lines. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was no panic, only resolve. Outside, the people gathered. They came barefoot, in rags, in uniforms, in prayer. Farmers, students, mothers with infants tied to their backs, all standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the falling rain. They had no weapons, only flags and songs. They refused to hide. This was their land, and no one would turn them back into subjects. The first airstrikes fell before noon. Dust and fire rose over the northern horizon, but the spirit in the city did not break. Across the nation, civilians began organizing food drives for soldiers, guiding refugees, carrying stretchers. It was no longer the government defending Burkina Faso. It was its people. Traoré watched live footage of the advance, his expression carved in iron. "They think unity is fragile," he murmured. "But unity is the one thing they can't kill." The room fell silent. He turned to his generals. "Pull the defensive line back to the Sahel Ridge. Do not strike first. Let them come closer." It was a dangerous gamble, but one born from a deeper understanding. The invaders didn't just want victory. They wanted chaos. They wanted the image of Africa eating itself alive. Traoré refused to give them that. Hours passed. Then, as the sun began to fall, the sky itself seemed to catch fire. Explosions lit up the horizon like volcanic lightning, shaking the city to its bones. The people prayed, but they did not run. And in that trembling light, something unseen shifted, a kind of collective awakening that no power could command or control. By nightfall, a convoy of foreign tanks approached the outer settlements. But as they entered, something unexpected happened. The villages were empty, not abandoned, but evacuated with precision. And then from the hills came the sound of horns. Dozens of Burkina Faso soldiers, joined by civilians, emerged from the fog and dust, not with tanks, but with an understanding of their land that no satellite could read. Guerrilla formations struck and vanished like ghosts. Supply lines collapsed. Communications jammed. Every kilometer became an ambush, every field a weapon. The invaders faltered. In the chaos, one of Traoré's field units managed to intercept an encrypted broadcast. Operation Restore Order has failed. Retreating in stages. The message spread faster than any bullet. By dawn, the foreign forces were gone, not defeated by superior firepower, but by a population that refused to submit. Traoré's gamble had worked, but the cost was immense. Villages burned, roads destroyed, countless lives lost. In the aftermath, silence fell again. Not the silence of fear, the silence of realization. The streets filled once more, not in panic, but in mourning and pride. Families carried portraits of lost sons and daughters. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and rain. Traoré walked among them, his uniform soaked, his boots caked with mud. He said no words, none were needed. Every glance, every bowed head, spoke what could not be said. Then, one voice rose from the crowd, a child's voice, thin but clear. Africa will not kneel. The chant spread like wildfire. Within minutes, thousands were shouting, their fists raised to the heavens. Across Africa, the images went viral. A sea of people standing in the ashes, declaring victory not in destruction, but in defiance. In global capitals, the reaction was stunned disbelief. Economists called it unsustainable. Politicians called it chaos. But historians would later call it something else, the awakening. Weeks later, at a small ceremony beneath the new flagpole erected in the capital's heart, Traoré stood before the crowd. His voice was hoarse, his body worn, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. We were told that unity was impossible, he said, that Africa was too poor, too divided, too weak. But weakness, he paused, is only the word used by those who fear our strength. He lifted the flag, red for blood, green for hope, gold for the future. The crowd erupted. Beyond Burkina Faso, something irreversible had begun. Mali followed, then Niger, then Guinea. Borders softened. Visas were abolished. Trade routes reopened not for profit but for people. Across the continent, a new map was being drawn, one not written by colonizers but by dreamers. And as night fell on the capital, the lights returned. Not all, not everywhere, but enough. The hum of electricity spread through the city like a heartbeat returning to life. Traoré stood on the balcony, watching the horizon glow faintly with the promise of dawn. He whispered to the memory of every fallen soul, every nameless farmer, every soldier who had stood their ground. This was never about a border. It was about a continent remembering its name. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, the echo of drums and the sound of a new age being born. Somewhere, in the quiet beyond politics and power, Africa was breathing again. And as the stars emerged one by one, the question that had haunted generations now hung in the air, not as despair, but as hope. Is this the moment Africa finally found itself?